Mahalo to all of you, and thank you for having us here. We appreciate Hawaii Energy Conference inviting us out to talk a little bit about cybersecurity today, and also we appreciate you for being here with us. You know, when you think about cybersecurity, a lot of people think about stolen passwords, they think about ransomware, malware, things like that. But for Hawaii, cybersecurity is increasingly meaning something much bigger. It has a lot of more impact to us. Can hospitals operate? Can fuel move? Can military installations function? Can families communicate during an emergency? You know, Hawaii's energy future is becoming cleaner, it's becoming smarter, it's becoming more distributed and more connected. And that means we have a lot of opportunities for resilience, but that also means it expands the attack surface in ways that affect every resident of the state of Hawaii. You know, we occupy a unique strategic position in the Indo Pacific, where energy, resilience, national security all become tied together, intertwined, and deeply connected. Today, we're very fortunate to have leaders from government, from national research, and from operational cybersecurity to help us understand both the risks that we face and the opportunities that are ahead. With us is Jimmy Collins. She's Chief of Planning and Operations for the State of Hawaii Office of Homeland Security. Jordan Henry on the end. He's the Director of Cybersecurity Research Center, National Laboratory of the Rockies. And in the center, Chuck Weisenborn. He's the Public Sector Chief Technology Officer, Facility Security Officer of Dragos Public Sector. So we really appreciate you guys being with us. To start us off, those are really impressive titles. Can you tell us what you do? Maybe Jimmy, you can start.
Yeah, certainly. So as Ed said, Chief of Planning and Operations, what that really means is my portfolio consists of three major programs for the state. The first one is the Critical Infrastructure Security and Resilience Program. The second is the statewide cybersecurity program. And the third, really more nebulous, is the Emerging Threats Program, which is really right now very much focused on the regional threat in cybersecurity, the elephant in the room, that is China.
Chuck?
Good afternoon, everybody. If you look at the little sheet that says what does Chuck do, it talks about technology and helping people solve problems with tech. But at the end of the day, I'm a dad who likes to read stories to his kid at night. And so my job, really, is to make it as possible as we can that when you flip on that light switch, that the lights come on. And I also enjoy making sure that our adversaries like the PRC, Russia, Iranians, and others remain frustrated that they cannot deny us access to power, water, and the things that we need to live.
Jordan?
Yeah, so I guess as director, I just spend a lot of time emailing on the phone. That's kind of most of my job nowadays. But really, it's we have a team of 60 at the National Laboratory of the Rockies focused on nothing but cybersecurity for the energy space. So much is changing so quickly. The grid's becoming more software-defined, and our team is really focused on security solutions that can be widely adoptable by the energy sector themselves so that they can all be a part of this collective cyber defense structure that we're really after. So boiling it down, that's in its most principal components, that's what we're doing.
Awesome. So all three of you are super technical, incredibly smart, have very high-profile jobs, very difficult jobs. But when you explain cybersecurity to a non-technical audience, what do you want people to understand? I'll leave that anybody.
Yeah, I can start. Well, first of all, cybersecurity is one word. Let's make sure, just get that out. One word. But I think, at least, especially in the energy space, I would say the most important thing to understand is that cybersecurity is not an optional thing, especially in the direction that we're moving. Like I just said in the research that we're doing at the laboratory, energy is just inherently software-defined, and the most tractable way to manage the risks of cybersecurity, which are just increasingly uncertain, by the way. Again, things are changing so quickly. Even understanding and boiling down the risk of cyber and what does it mean alongside wildfire risk and all these other risks that we face is incredibly, incredibly challenging, but it's a non-negotiable part of who we are in the energy sector and where we're going. And so that's going to require all of us, right? For everyone in this room, to the companies, the OEMs, a truly collective effort that is nationwide, where cybersecurity becomes part of the ethos and the vernacular that comes along for the ride, and all these other challenges of large loads and everything else that we're experiencing. So, that's just something. Again, we're trying to really push the envelope, make sure that cybersecurity is as easily adoptable as possible by as wide of audience as possible.
Yeah, I guess I'll go next. When I think of cybersecurity in the utility industry, I often kind of frame it as, do adversaries have the capability to cause a physical impact or an outage, right? Do they have the access to the systems that would allow them to push button, turn off lights? And finally, do they have the intent? Do they intend to cause an impact? And what I'll tell folks is that all three of those questions, the answer is yes. And it's not a, maybe could happen somewhere in the future. It's a already has happened. When we look at Ukraine 2015, 2016, we look at Littleton Light and Power a couple years ago, and we look at Poland last year. Adversaries have capabilities. They have used those capabilities. They continue to do so. And as of this year, we've seen adversaries collect the information necessary to actually cause an impact, right? Not just diagrams, architectures, but operational process control values, right? But all that being said, that's bad news bears. The good news is that cyber risk is manageable and that we've got some incredibly smart engineers, cybersecurity professionals, and other folks that are in the fight every single day. And so no matter how bad of a day we have, the thing I want everybody to leave with is that defense is doable, and that when it comes down to the wire, resiliency as a person, as families, as communities, will overcome risk and impacts.
Yeah, so I think for my part, as I mentioned, two programs, cybersecurity and critical infrastructure, and oftentimes the conversations I have with critical infrastructure is about cybersecurity, certainly amongst other kinds of threats. So I think kind of in two lines. One, on a personal level, there's not a single person here in this audience or truly anywhere now in the modern world that doesn't have a cyber vulnerability and isn't connected to that cyber environment, right? You have phones, you have, good Lord, you have refrigerators that tell you when you need groceries. Those are all cyber-enabled kinds of activities. When we love the efficiencies and we love the things that brings to us, but with that, it also brings kind of a responsibility to understand what it is that you are enabling by having those kinds of appliances, literally appliances. The other thing is, and I'll echo, the cyber defense, your own cyber protection, as well as critical infrastructure, this is definitely a doable project. And there's a large team that's really coming together to think about it in creative ways. AI, and we'll probably hear that echoed on this panel, is enabling both the nefarious actors as well as our own ability to get ahead of those nefarious actors. So I think there are some good news stories out there for us, but I do think you need to understand that you are part of that ecosystem voluntarily when you use your cell phone, but also just in how your environment is being developed using these technological tools. So it's important that you kind of pay attention and try and understand what's going on at your level so that you can be a part of that team to enable security across all of our communities.
Let's stick with you, Jimmy. In your role, you look at, from the state perspective, you look at Homeland Security, you look at the way that Hawaii is perhaps uniquely vulnerable and maybe uniquely important. Can you share some of your thoughts with us?
Yeah, and I think, Ed, you mentioned it in the introduction, Hawaii occupies a very strategic location for some very specific reasons. We certainly have a very large and important footprint from our national security apparatus, both with our Defense Department, but enabling agencies as well. And that's important for a couple of reasons. One, they are great partners in the work that we do to try and understand where adversaries are and what they're trying to do. But it's also something that we have to acknowledge that adversaries understand too, right? It's no great secret that Indo Pacific Command is here. It's no great secret that we have capabilities across all of our islands. I mean, you see them in your own communities. And so I think it is important on a couple of levels to understand that this is, I want to call it a team sport. We use that a lot in our conversations kind of amongst each other. We look at anybody that is working in critical infrastructure, even down to the users of computers, as partners in this journey to try and keep our communities secure. Whether it's the scams that you see perpetrated over the phones. I think all of us have probably seen the "you've got a ticket, you better go pay it," and those links that are text to us, all the way to what we imagine to be the big cyber kinds of incidents that you might have seen in the headlines. So I think if we think about this in the broadest sense of community, and in our geographical kind of isolation, our challenges with getting support should some large kind of incident happen, just know that we are looking inward. We are looking at self-reliance. We're looking at growing talent here and keeping it here. We're looking at all of those kinds of aspects to really bolster our security in a kind of community collective way.
So as we think about the way that we're uniquely situated, it makes then us start thinking about the complexity of the grid, the complexity of the systems we operate. Maybe Jordan, you can help us with how has the threat landscape to energy systems, to critical infrastructure changed in recent years?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's lots of threats to energy, more specifically to cyber. I don't think it would be a surprise to anyone here that energy would be really, even amongst the 16 critical infrastructures that exist out there that DHS, identifies, that energy would really be, at the top of the list. And so the work that we've done, working with the private sector, working with other government agencies, it's very clear that energy is targeted as a way for foreign adversaries, those could be nation states, predominantly is what we're talking about, to target energy as a way to shape conflict, to shape policy. And there's lots of reporting out there at this point, even sponsored reporting from the US government, from other countries around the world who we partner with, where it is well known that energy is there as an opportunity for adversaries to pre-position themselves in energy infrastructure and to hold it at risk. To have specific effects at a time of their choosing. That is really, really the key thing to take away. And that's not new. None of that is new. Those are things that have been well known for a decade or more, right, being openly said. I think what is new is that the complexity, the pace of change, the technology that we're seeing, not just with inside of a substation fence, but particularly outside of a substation fence, where there's, as Ed was talking about, the attack surface changing, potentially expanding, where the opportunities, right, for targeting energy as a way to, again, shape conflict, shape policy, is something that we're keenly aware of. And these are threats that we can't completely eliminate. These are things, going from a risk-based approach, we're really looking at how do we understand, what those threats look like, and where do we prioritize, right, our resources in addressing those threats? And so, really, at the end of the day, when we're thinking about energy, and for us, we understand that utilities, other non-utility stakeholders, OEMs, they truly are on the front lines of really this gray zone warfare that's already existing today. We see this. Dragos sees this every day. They're responding to this every day, and so it really is a place where, again, this isn't things that have happened in the past. These are things that are also happening today, right, actively.
Yeah,
Yes,
just
Chuck,
really
tell us
quick.
about what's happening today. Tell us some stories.
Yeah, oh boy, story time with Chuck is always an interesting proposition. In 2020, when I joined Dragos, we tracked maybe 10 to 12 adversary groups that were targeting critical infrastructure. And when we kind of define what a threat adversary group is for us, it's a very narrow definition that requires us to know adversary infrastructure, their victimology, their TTPs. And so those are 10 to 12 actors that are
Hey, Chuck,
What's a
what are
TTP?
tactic, technique, procedure. Essentially, like the things the adversary does to get in, and once they get in, the steps that they take to keep moving around a system. Now we're up to 26. That's a pretty big increase in 6 years for a very focused segment of cybersecurity. But what's even more concerning than that is last year, 6 of those groups matured from focusing on initial entry, so just getting in the door, and moving around, navigating the hallways, to actually being able to cause impacts and developing capabilities that help them cause impacts. That's a big change in 1 year. 6 of those 26 went to the next level again, showing that intent that they want to cause outages and problems.
Let's double click on the impact piece. So a cybersecurity event happens today in Hawaii. What would the impact look like? What would some examples of those impacts be?
Sure. It's very hard to quantify because there's so many different scenarios, but let's imagine that the impact is in the area that a telecommunications center is, cellular, ground station, things of that nature. You may not have internet suddenly. Mm-hmm. If it's in an area where there's a lot of financial infrastructure, you may not have access to your bank account information. And if it's a large enough scale, you may go to the hospital and there may not be power. They may be operating using backup generators and things of that nature. It could be very, very wide in narrow or very large scope.
And potentially in the dark, like we learned about in our previous panel this morning.
Absolutely.
Jimmy, when you guys look at the impacts from a cyber attack in Hawaii, what concerns your shop?
Yeah, so actually, coming off a tabletop exercise on Monday and Tuesday, a cross-sector tabletop exercise that we hosted, looking at just that, right? So we had representatives from telecommunications, from data centers, from the energy sector, from water and wastewater organizations. I would say the most concerning scenario is where we have a significant incident, but one that also causes what we consider cascading impacts. So whether or not your power goes down, maybe we're in brownouts. But if it's a coordinated attack, maybe they're also connecting to the attack surface that's in telecommunications. So it could be your cell phone, it could be your internet, and you might be seeing those kinds of, whether they're outages or not, certainly access being really constrained. Water, wastewater, we get to some more potentially critical impacts where you don't have the ability to purify or to transition wastewater into water or purify water before it comes into a household. You have boil water notices and those kinds of things. Think probably like the worst impacts from a natural disaster hitting your neighborhood, and I would say expand that by days instead of just hours. When the Kona low hit my house up on North Shore on Oahu, we were out of power, I think at the most maybe 6 or 7 hours. If I were to multiply that out, that could start to be incredibly painful. Even that is painful for folks who need things like dialysis, right? So the community impacts can really start to expand exponentially just from one set of critical infrastructure being impacted, and think about the dependencies they each have potentially on the other. So you start to really get some serious cascading impacts that you start to see in your own communities.
So it sounds to me like being secure is not so much about a technological approach, but it's more about people, about processes, about putting in the security that makes the cybersecurity stuff secure. Would you agree with me, Jordan?
Yes and no. I think at the end of the day, cybersecurity really starts with, I guess, kind of a people perspective, right? Our fallibility as humans, right, is always going to be one of our largest risks, whether you're not in the energy sector or finance, wherever that is, right? People at the end of the day are the ones, right, who are interacting with the technology, and that's always going to be a risk. I will say, though, that, and that's historically been true, I think some of those dynamics are changing somewhat. I think that especially when we think about energy, if we think about what the grid looked like even 50 years ago, or maybe even 15 years ago, and where we're going today, there's so much more technology that is based on software that enables us to operate a grid closer to its stability limits, to eke out additional capacity on the same lines that we have. These are things that have to move at machine speed, and there's a lot of technology that's being built from the switch mode power supply perspective to be able to enable a BESS system to help us ride through these frequency disturbances, or inverters to help with grid forming. All of those things are, again, software-defined and things that you're not going to see a human really interact with. And I think some of the dynamics about reliability in the system that we're moving to really drives to, I think, more of a balance between people, process, and technology in a way where people and process, I think, and I think still today, are still one of the biggest components. But I think technology is starting to play a larger role than we thought. And I would say people and process, it's still around. And I think even specifically on the response and recovery side, I think that comes into play.
But all the things that you talked about, we like to talk about from the perspective of building resilience, right? We talk about things like microgrids. We talk about things like distributed energy resources, and all of those things giving us more options. Are we creating just a bigger attack surface, or are we actually bringing resilience? Maybe Chuck, you can take that one.
Sure. It's yes to both, really. The advantages that the most recent additions to our electric grid, like distributed energy resources, microgrids, battery energy storage systems, and so on, bring is significant. However, many of those technologies require some type of connection, either externally to maybe a third-party service provider or internally to other systems as part of just standard grid operations. And every connection represents a possible path that an adversary could take. That all said, thinking back to the people, process, technology question, the technology side of cyber, I think, is we can solve any problem given enough time, right? But the people side, we're still challenged with combating kind of misperceptions, and with people kind of focusing on maybe some more traditional cybersecurity procedures that don't align with actual adversary capabilities. And so I think that when it comes down to it, technology easy, making sure you're doing the right technology, putting the technology in the right places, that's where we get a little bit challenged.
So it sounds like, because many of those assets are owned by different people, it becomes now a people coordination type, issue. And so I guess, we partner with your shop, Jimmy, and we partner with all of our panelists, and as we do that, I guess it makes me wonder how important is that military slash government civilian partnership when it comes to energy resilience, Jimmy?
Yeah, I mean, I'd change it from important to absolutely necessary. And I mentioned this as a team sport. We're all part of that team. I don't think that you can get at the challenges we see with emerging technologies, with the rattling of swords from nation states who seek to harm us, or even from the criminality in the cyber domain. You cannot get at all of that and really not have a full force team at it. That's one of the reasons why we look across all the sectors in Hawaii to participate in the dialogues and exercises in giving us feedback on the kinds of things that they're seeing and experiencing so that we can all kind of collectively figure out, what is our state's risk mitigation plan for these kinds of things? How do we prepare both at the critical infrastructure organizational level, but also across our government and with our citizenry? How do we ensure that even on the worst day, if there's a blip in the power, how can we bring that back to serviceability so we're not negatively impacting the critical functions that you all rely on to make sure that the banks are operating and the grocery stores have refrigerated food and all of those things that these critical infrastructure sectors provide. So I think you cannot do what we're attempting to do without the fullest intent and all of the players at the table.
I think just to add to that briefly, I think it's really important to very clearly define expectations for what each of those partners will bring to the table. And sometimes, and I've had experience with this in multiple roles, sometimes what people want to bring to the table is not realistically what they're going to be able to bring to the table. And that's where, here on the island, you guys have such a, kind of unique perspective on this, because if the fiber gets cut, if the satellites are down, you've got each other. You've got what's here on the island. And it doesn't matter if you're a military, state, civilian at that point. But it is important to acknowledge what resources and what talent we have. Mm-hmm. And I sometimes see that kind of going sideways in some discussions with federal, state, territorial governments and utility partners in particular.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll add is just engaging enough across both the private sector, the defense and others, is, with energy being overwhelmingly privately owned, right? But yet having this very critical function and the, reliance that we have in certain defense and national security functions on, reliable energy, it really gets to a point where right now, at least the conversations that we're having at the lab, is that these stakeholders are, especially on the defense side, they're more concerned about infrastructure outside of the base than they are inside the base. That is where their greatest concerns are right now. And I think it gets to the point that you guys were just saying here. The only way to really get after those challenges is through this shared responsibility, this communication, partnership, this dance that must happen, right? Yeah, not a nice to have, a must have. And I think, as you mentioned, there's a number of, challenges with that and expectations on who can bring, what things to the table. But it's something that I think all of us have to collectively figure out, how do we get past this? Because, if you look outside the country, and again, we just talked about threats, our adversaries are coordinated. We absolutely need to be coordinated, right? And not just on keeping, the lights on all the time, but, how do we minimize the consequences of not the if, but when conversation?
So one of the things that I heard that you take away and that we benefit from at Hawaiian Electric is the scale that can come from partnership, right? A team sport means there are more of us working together to solve the same problem. One of the things that I think you cannot open a newspaper or read any blog online or any magazine right now without seeing the two letters, right? AI. That's a scale that we've never seen before. How do you, when you think about AI maybe over the next 5 years or so, how do you think that's going to either improve or change how defenders deal with the cybersecurity risks that we see?
Yeah. We bucket it similar to how other folks in the cyber, or just really in the security community, bucket it, security of, with, and from AI. So we're kind of looking at all of those different things and trying to reconcile, in addition to energy changing, you add in AI, right? You add in the changes to the threats and hazards, right? It just really is a challenging yet fascinating space to be doing research in. And from an AI perspective, I think fundamentally, I don't think AI is going to change sort of the asymmetric nature of cyber, meaning, from a defense perspective, we have to defend against everything, right? The attacker's got to be, successful once. It's an oversimplification, but it just kind of gets the aspects of the asymmetry of cyber. And I don't think AI is really going to change that necessarily. I think where AI is really going to help us from a defense perspective, and this is a lot of what we're doing at the laboratory, is we're trying to shift from identify, protect, detect functions in cybersecurity and focus much more on response and recovery. And the response and recovery side from a defense perspective is where I think we're trying to exploit AI as much as we can. How can we not just go from the whack-a-mole, how do we keep everybody out? We have to do that, and we will always do that. But I think just given where we're going, public safety power shut-offs, not just the things from a cyber threat perspective, is that we have to focus more on response and recovery and minimizing the consequences of successful attacks. And that's where I think AI can really be a game changer and help us from a defense perspective.
Yeah, I'd say that AI can make good attackers and good defenders better, and it makes bad attackers better, but bad defenders worse because of assumptions and inability to kind of weed out, what's accurate, what's not. And we are seeing folks leverage AI for attacks. Just recently, there was a compromise of a water treatment utility in Mexico where an adversary used commercial AI not just to plan or build capabilities, but 70% of the activities that occurred on the network were done by AI, not by an actual person. And so it's very clear that we are in the place and time that we're in right now is that we have to be concerned. We have to understand what those capabilities look like, and we have to be able to use them to our advantage.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways that we're looking at AI is actually to help us understand better the systems and how the systems interrelate to each other. I talked about cascading impacts. The more we understand where vulnerabilities kind of bleed out and over across infrastructures or sectors, the better off that we can identify ways to close those vulnerability gaps, right? So understanding our own environment better, I think, is definitely a utility of the AI tool that we're looking at specifically in Homeland Security. The other thing I'd say, I think more broadly, the thing that maybe it keeps me up at night, some nights, is the speed. I can't even wrap my head around the speed that's going to change on both sides, right? We're going to learn faster on our end, but so are our adversaries. And I think that puts a great deal of pressure on the defender team, Team Hawaii, yay, to really adopt where we possibly can AI tools that get us to that kind of speed, whether it's just business processes so you can free up manpower to do other things that are much more critical for you, to be able to focus on those criticalities, but really to think in terms of how can you speed things up that you're doing so that you can stay ahead, because I'll guarantee you the threat actors, good example, are using it to get better at attacking.
So I think it's also important for us to understand how we use AI for just general purpose activities within the organization. And we've got to understand how the AI actually works, because if there ever is an incident, if we don't understand how the components of our grid and the things that are driving decisions within our grid, if we don't understand how those are occurring, how can we actually walk it back and figure out, how did this happen? How did this incident happen to be able to, try to our best to prevent it.
Good point. I was impressed with the positivity around the AI question. So I'm going to take that a step further and see if I can get you guys to kind of help us to see, as you look at the risks and the current posture of the energy infrastructure here in Hawaii, and as well as across the United States, what do you see that gives you some confidence that we can actually build a resilient future for not only the people that are around today, but the folks that are going to be users of the grid over the next 20, 30 years?
I'm very optimistic about the future, right? And this is at a time, again, where there's more uncertainty, there's more risks that we're facing, and that's not just from, natural hazards or cyber, right? How do we pay for all of this, right? We're in a fiscal environment where it's really challenging. We have public utility commissions, right, that, some utilities across the country are struggling to get their rate cases passed. We can't put enough steel in the ground fast. I mean, there's so many challenges. We're actually in a growth environment on electricity, right, for the first time in a decade. And so lots and lots of challenges. However, this being a cybersecurity panel, I think the technology necessary to manage all of this, right, to unlock the full benefits of our grid infrastructure, to get more out of what we have, I think cybersecurity inevitably will be an enabler of all of this technology in ways that we haven't seen before. I think it's going to enable more stakeholders to have more influence on grid reliability than ever. It's going to allow us to be able to, mitigate the consequences, right, of disruptions. I think we might want to, I'm not going to say this about Hawaii, but just in general, I'm being prepared just for myself and more grid disruptions. And so just, mostly through public safety power shutoffs. I live in the foothills of Golden, Colorado, and I've had a number of those just over the last 6 months. And so I think that there's a lot here where cybersecurity can be an enabler of this technology, and ultimately that's going to get us to a place where we can be more resilient, right, and reliable than we are today.
I think cybersecurity is one of the most critical enablers for us to do both routine and creative things in the utility industries. When we think about many of the supply chain concerns that folks bring up on a regular basis, can we buy components that are made in China and use them safely? Cyber is a way to help mitigate that risk. And when we talk about AI, it's also a way to make sure that that those systems are doing what they're supposed to be and detect early enough when something starts kind of going sideways a little bit.
If you do cybersecurity well in an enterprise or in an environment that is well structured, that means you have good governance. That also means you invest wisely. You target those investments to give you the maximum benefit. But you're also forced to do something else. And I think this is where, Jimmy, you guys focus on resilience planning.
Yep.
What are your thoughts in the next 5 to 10 years on us as a state doing that?
Well, I think, just about 2 months ago, we established what we're calling the SEAM Initiative Chartered Working Group. Has to do with the friction between Homeland Security and Homeland Defense. Long story there, but essentially what the Chartered Working Group is representatives across critical infrastructure sectors throughout Hawaii coming together to have conversations about all these kinds of things like we've been asking and answering questions on here. So I'll answer the previous question and that one at the same time. What gives me the most hope is that people are coming together and they are coalescing on things that we believe we can do. And we can do together, or we can encourage and invest on our own with our own means. So along with that chartered working group, we've found some like-minded technologists that are really willing to help us in those efforts. So we're looking at a coalition, we're calling it, of some folks who are really trying to understand how the different sectors interface with each other. So we've got some technology that we're trying to leverage to understand and to expand our knowledge base, but marry that with the people who are really energized to do the right thing, the operators and owners of critical infrastructure in the state really getting on board and putting, skin in the game, as they say. I think all of those things kind of brought together is what's going to make a difference here. It's going to, give us that inward strength that we're going to have to face the future, whatever it may hold. And I think that's a huge growth that we're going to experience in the next couple of years. I'm really excited about the organizations that have bought into that on both the coalition as well as the chartered working group. And I have some super high expectations. I told them all they'd have to roll up sleeves and work really hard, and they said yes. And so, yeah, very exciting times.
Do you feel you have enough membership?
No.
Do you open that membership up to other than Hawaiian Electric?
Of course, Ed.
This is your pitch time.
Yes, I know. No, so we're looking for representation across all the 16 critical infrastructure sectors. So if you have a business that touches things like power, water, wastewater, telecommunications, transportation, banking, hospitals, public health, any of those things, we are absolutely looking for partners to join us. And we're looking to help partners who want to help themselves. So I think you'll find a very energized and focused group with the Chartered Working Group, and we'd love to have any organization hop on board.
So they can contact you and the contact info in the...
Absolutely.
Very good.
Yeah, and I just want to double tap on the importance of what Jimmy and team are doing, because and this is something we're grappling with even at, amongst the national labs is, you think about energy and you think about its ties to all these other critical infrastructures, the interdependencies that exist, some of them changing. No singular stakeholder has all the visibility and knowledge to truly understand systemic risk in the way that cyber or any other threats really manifest themselves. It's a real challenge. It's a thing that I think is getting in the way of decision making. It's making it more challenging to understand how we prioritize our resources, right? Everything is a trade-off, right? There's so many variables. And in order to get there, it requires these partnerships, and I think more meaningful partnerships than we've ever even had before, and the analysis capabilities to really understand how those systemic risks play out. So I really do encourage, hopefully people here, and I think Hawaii's doing this better than just about anywhere else that I've seen it. I mean, the community that exists here, I think everyone understands, right, the shared responsibility that exists here, and hopefully the work that's done here can be a model, right, that we can replicate elsewhere.
So just a cautionary tale on the partnership side of the house. A partnership without an outcome is just wasted time and conversation. I've watched many different organizations talk about partnerships, have joint exercises, bring different folks from across the government industry together, and then everybody high fives each other and goes home, right? And that's the next time they talk is 2 weeks, 3 weeks before the next exercise. If we're not actually taking action on the things that come out of those working groups, then we've lost focus. And it's so important now, especially given the risk and the threat environment, that we focus on action, not just everything else.
Yep.
Well said. Partnership without action is a social club.
Exactly.
So if you could ask Hawaii's leaders to focus on one priority, let's say over the next, we'll give it 3 years, what would it be? Jordan?
I mean, I'm just going to double tap kind of the last conversation we just had here, last question, is the coordination piece and the information sharing piece is incredibly important. And it has been, I've been in cybersecurity for energy, I'm a power engineer by education, right? Been in, grid resilience, microgrids, and all of that cyber. And for the better part of 18 years, I've been hearing, we're going to get you data, we're going to share information, and ultimately those things just break down. Once they get to the GCs within the organizations, it just breaks down. And that is sort of the coordination and collaboration that's needed for us to truly understand, again, the systemic system-wide sorts of issues, right, that we have where no singular stakeholder can answer these questions alone. And as much as we can, with the leadership here at the state level, right, and this is something that we have actually been looking at, also CONUS here, right, the continental United States side, is understanding how we're breaking down barriers, right, even across state levels, right? It's really challenging, right? And that's why I'm hoping that, things here in Hawaii, these things can be done to be a model and replicated elsewhere. But cybersecurity knows no boundaries, right? Technology that exists here on island is similar technology that's going to exist on the mainland. It's technology that exists in other countries. Some of that is managed, right, very similarly. Software supply chains, everything. So we're inheriting and sharing risk outside of just a state boundary. And so being able to replicate and model, break down barriers, first of all, be advocates for enabling this information sharing, but then trying to align that with the rest of the country, right? Just the way that we have this set up, states have their own regulations, and being able, trying to do this in an ad hoc way where we have 50 different approaches for doing this, I just don't think is scalable from a national level perspective. And so I hope that, these things can actually be done in a way that's replicated and consistent and harmonized, right, across the sector, not just in the state of Hawaii.
There's a couple things. I think first on my list is make sure that we have a realistic expectation of what federal government is going to be able to provide in the case the balloon goes up and we're in a conflict. Because what U.S. Indo-PACOM, the various military entities here on the island can do today may be very different when they're also in a active kinetic battle, right? And then two, I think that given everything happening in the world today, there's really two fundamental questions that every critical infrastructure provider should be able to answer. One of those is, was it cyber or not cyber? And two, which is related to that first question, can we put these systems back into operation manually or otherwise if there is an event, cyber or not cyber? And I say knowing cyber, not cyber is important because that does influence sometimes how you restore systems. But it is also a national strategic need to be able to answer that question, because if it is, the folks all over need to know, because that changes the paradigm that we're really living in, right?
Yeah, and especially since, because I think it's well understood at this point, the first fight's going to be in cyber, right? It's happening today, like we said before.
Yeah, we're in the fight. And I want to leverage something that Chuck said about actionable. So one of the things that we've got in front of us in the Chartered Working Group is actually an action plan for the coming year. One of those pinpointed action items is to actually identify enabling legislation that we want to champion with our own legislature. And that is something near and dear to my heart. There are a couple of things that I've got on the top of my mind that I think would be huge game changers. One is getting a piece of legislation through that asks for protection for critical infrastructure information so that it can be shared, so that we can gain a broader understanding across the state of what kinds of things are going on amongst the infrastructure elements, so we can do analysis that's tied to different kinds of threat scenarios and so forth, but mostly so that we can establish a very high baseline of trust across the critical infrastructure community and with the state Office of Homeland Security. So a very pinpoint, like I said, action item that we're driving towards is some enabling legislation, and that's not the only one. I think there's probably another couple of pieces that once we get into the dialogue that'll bubble up into the conversation too.
I think everybody heard you. Hopefully we'll be able to implement some of that. Fantastic answers. I really appreciate that, and I'm sure we all did. There's a couple of questions from the audience that maybe we can cover. One of them I find kind of fascinating. So how are we mitigating the risks that LLMs pose today? So threat actors can accelerate and magnify attacks by using AI capabilities. So what do you guys see happening to address that?
I mean, I'll maybe take a first stab because we're doing that today. You know, as it turns out, surprise, surprise, it's very easy to use LLMs to target energy, right? We have proved this out within our laboratory. We're seeing it even out in the wild. And so I think, you know, Chuck, you mentioned it, how, right, it's raising kind of the barrier or lowering the barrier to entry, right, for people to, you know, to target energy. And, you know, again, from our perspective, and it's not just LLMs, but I think this is one area that we're trying to get ahead of this is, obviously there's defensive ways in which to use AI. And I won't get into all the technical speak and things that we're doing that, but there's ways in which we're piloting AI approaches that enable information sharing and anomaly detection, not just at one utility or one energy sector stakeholder, but across all of them. And if we can understand patterns of life, we could be more confident in responding to those. But the other thing is, you know, looking at specifically response and recovery. Knowing, right, that the barrier to entry is lowered, knowing that LLMs are going to make it easier and faster, dwell times are going to go down, meaning, you know, how long an adversary is actually sitting in an environment is going to go down, which makes it harder for us to find them. This is the cat and mouse game, right? It's like cyber's that game you don't win, you just try to keep from losing. And I think there's a lot of those things that were, you know, again, we talked about the offensive, defensive aspect of AI and how it kind of benefits both. But I think the response and recovery piece is where I think we can do a lot of good in mitigating LLMs.
I also think it's important to understand that an AI-enabled or conducted attack is still a cyber attack. And so generally the principles that already apply to a human-conducted attack also apply to the same AI-enabled or conducted attack.
I'm going to just, one point I do want to make is, given that the adversaries are already getting really well versed in how to utilize AI, I think it's really important for all of us to consider use cases where we can start to understand how AI can support what it is, whatever it is that you're doing in your function, in your organization. There is a protocol I was actually just introduced to this week a decision model, if you will, on how to take a use case and understand where you can apply some AI to it to really test it out, say like in a pilot. And I think that's important for those of us who aren't steeped in AI. That's not me, I'm not steeped in AI. So I really was fascinated by this decision tool that I was introduced to, and I'm happy to share it out because I think for those who aren't mired in that kind of work, it's important to have a way to think about it. And I thought that was something that I could utilize as I'm thinking about where we can apply AI to be on the defender side and to skill up.
So just to follow on that, because I think this is where you're headed, so just give me a second. And as another question, and I love the fact that it dovetails into all the comments that we've received. So I'm going to combine two questions into one. We heard a lot about defensive AI. What are your thoughts about offensive AI? And then the second piece is, what are your thoughts about AI as an enabler for people and processes? Kind of the same thing that you can talk about together.
Yeah. Well, from an offensive perspective, there's already lots of research out there. And by the way, AI is not new, right? I mean, even in the cyber community, we've been using ML for lots of different things. And so this isn't necessarily a new space. I think generative AI, right, your ChatGPTs and all of that is really what is kind of made this kind of front and center, obviously from the energy perspective too, how much electricity, right, energy we're using for it is another aspect. But from an offensive perspective, I think the things that we found in our own research, and I think this is corroborated by others within the community, is that, you know, before control systems, right, the digital technologies, communications that underpin the operation of grid technology, of energy technology, have really been these bespoke kind of isolated environments that no one really knew anything about. And so if we were going to, from an adversary hat on, I need to target this infrastructure and in particular have a particular effect that I want to have, there's a lot of time and effort that's necessary to understand that system. How does the digital technology map to the physics parts of it, right? And what we found is, some of the AI approaches are really making that targeting thing a lot easier. There was some malware. There was a malware framework called the Crash Override that was developed by Russia. Ukraine's kind of been a proving ground for them for a while, right? Even ahead of the war. But there was malware there. It was configured as a framework, and it was basically, let me give this to an operator. All you have to do is give it a config file that says, go after this device at this IP address with this port, this register, to open a breaker and have your effect. We can automate all of that a priori work without needing any sort of reconnaissance done, right? AI can really do that. So I think AI is really driving forward that ability to do that faster. On the defensive side, I wanted to double tap something that we talked about at lunch, which was, Mythos is something that came out. You may have saw that in the news. It's Anthropic LLM specifically at going after and looking at vulnerabilities in devices. At first glance, right, you might say, oh, this is really scary. Now everyone's going to know all the vulnerabilities that exist in all of our SEL relays. I'm just coming up with things. But from a defensive mindset, we were talking at lunch how that could actually be a very positive thing, right? We can look at that, and before the vendor releases this equipment, it actually knows what those vulnerabilities are. It can actually patch those. So it is still that pro and con, right, that AI brings to the table. It's the world we live in, and we just have to get used to it.
So targeting, it's important to remember that in the cyber battle space, there's also people, and AI also enables massive processing of collected data, which if you can't get in from an external means, you may be able to find information to compromise somebody internally. So it's important to remember that. One of our folks at Dragos did a talk at S4, which is a global industrial control systems operational technology conference this year, about building a piece of malware using AI. And this is an individual that has years of expertise in building and reverse engineering malware, taking it apart and figuring out how malware works. And what he discovered is that the amount of troubleshooting, tweaking, tuning to make something that was built by AI actually functioned roughly equaled the amount of time it would have taken him just to build it himself. That's not true universally for every protocol, right? I've done some work with Modbus, just playing around, where it was very trivial because that's a very well understood protocol, right? But in order to build something that can cause catastrophic scaling, cascading effects, right, it's going to take a little bit more. And AI does get things wrong. And you do have to check its work quite often and frequently if you're trying to build a capability. So it is not the end-all, be-all, right? It is absolutely a tool in the toolbox. And it is one that can make people more effective. But that is something to recognize, that there's still a lot of human work that goes into doing stuff like that.
I think we saw from our discussion, cyber is not just a technology issue. Cyber is actually a resilience issue. It's fundamentally about the resilience of the grid. It's about the resilience of, frankly, the foundation of our civilization as we know it. And I think we can all agree from the comments that we've heard today that our future, the future of our grid, the future of our communities depends on not just clean technology, smarter systems, but it depends on trust, it depends on coordination, it depends on being prepared, and that takes partnership. Partnership not just with government, but government, industry, research institutions, and the whole community acting together as a team, because cybersecurity, as you heard it more than once, is a team sport. So I appreciate this team very, very much. Enjoy working with you. I thank you. Please join me in thanking the panelists for sharing their expertise and perspectives.